There are moments in history when survival stops being about power, status, or wealth, and comes down to one simple question: what actually works when everything else breaks? Entire empires have discovered, often too late, that the foods they prized the most were the least capable of enduring real hardship. Crops that symbolized status collapsed under pressure, while overlooked alternatives, mocked, dismissed, and ignored, kept people alive. What you're about to uncover is not just the history of a grain. It's a pattern that repeats itself across centuries. A lesson in resilience hidden in plain sight, because long before modern supply chains, before refrigeration, before industrial agriculture, there existed a quiet backbone of survival, something hardy enough to outlast climate shifts, famine, and human arrogance. And if you pay attention, this story is not trapped in the past. It is directly relevant to how you think about food, preparedness, and resilience today. Because the same mistakes civilizations made then, overdependence, fragility, blind trust in superior systems, are being repeated right now. So the real question is not what people ate centuries ago. The real question is, when systems fail, will you rely on what looks impressive or what actually survives? Let's get into it. It began as an unwanted intruder in the earliest farms. Long before it became a staple of survival, this grain had no place in the plans of early farmers. Around 10,000 years ago, in the fertile regions where agriculture first took root, humans carefully cultivated wheat and barley. These were the prized crops, structured, predictable, and tied to early civilization itself. But among these orderly fields, something else began to appear. It wasn't planted, it wasn't nurtured, it simply grew. Oats emerged as a weed, an accidental presence thriving in the margins of carefully controlled farmland. Farmers tried to remove it. They didn't value it. It had no prestige, no economic importance, and certainly no cultural respect. But what made it undesirable in good conditions became its greatest strength in bad ones. Unlike wheat and barley, oats didn't require ideal soil. They tolerated poor conditions. They adapted to irregular weather. They survived neglect. Over generations, this created something rare, a crop hardened by adversity rather than optimized for perfection. Then humans made a critical move that changed everything. As populations expanded beyond the warm, stable climates of early agriculture, they pushed into colder, wetter regions, places like the highlands of Scotland and the forests of Scandinavia. This is where reality hit. Wheat, the symbol of agricultural success, struggled in these environments. Excess moisture rotted its roots. Short growing seasons limited its yield. Barley fared slightly better, but still failed under prolonged cold and dampness. The crops that built early civilization could not sustain it in harsher environments. But oats could. Where other grains failed, oats adapted effortlessly. They handled acidic soils, constant rain, and low temperatures without collapsing. They didn't produce the same refined flour or soft bread, but they provided something far more important: reliability. Communities that embraced oats gained a critical advantage, not luxury, but consistency. And in survival situations, consistency beats quality every time. This shift marked a turning point. What was once considered a nuisance became a necessity. Cultural arrogance blinded entire societies to what actually worked. Despite its growing importance, oats never gained universal respect. In fact, they became a symbol of division. In southern regions, where wheat still thrived, oats were viewed as inferior. Roman writers and later English scholars openly mocked societies that depended on them. To them, oats were animal feed, something unfit for civilized people. This wasn't based on survival data. It was based on perception. The irony is that those very societies dismissing oats were living in environments where they didn't need resilience. Their conditions allowed them to maintain preferences without consequences. But in the North, survival told a different story. Communities that relied on oats developed physical endurance that outsiders underestimated. Their diets provided slow-burning energy, essential for long periods of labor, travel, and exposure to cold environments. While wheat delivered quick energy, oats sustained it. This wasn't just about food, it was about performance under pressure. And history repeatedly shows that what is dismissed in times of comfort becomes essential in times of crisis. Survival depended as much on storage as it did on the crop itself. Growing food is only half the battle. Keeping it usable through harsh conditions is where real survival is decided. In regions with constant moisture and long winters, improper storage meant guaranteed loss. Rot, mold, and pests could destroy entire harvests before they were needed most. Ancient communities responded with ingenuity that modern systems often overlook. They developed underground storage pits designed to create low-oxygen environments. Once sealed, the grain inside consumed the available oxygen and produced carbon dioxide, effectively preserving itself. In these conditions, pests couldn't survive, and spoilage slowed dramatically. Grain stored this way could last for decades. But this system came with a serious risk. The same carbon dioxide that preserved the grain could kill a person entering the pit. Without proper testing, such as lowering a flame to check oxygen levels, entering these spaces could be fatal. At the same time, above-ground storage evolved with equal precision. Raised granaries built on stone pillars prevented rodents from accessing food supplies. The design was simple but effective, relying on structure rather than constant human intervention. These weren't accidental solutions, they were the result of necessity driving innovation, and they highlight a key principle. Survival systems must be both efficient and low maintenance. Food preparation itself became a form of survival engineering. Once harvested and stored, oats still needed to be transformed into something practical for daily use. In Northern Europe, this led to one of the most efficient food systems ever developed. Large batches of porridge were prepared and allowed to cool into solid forms. These could be sliced, carried, and consumed over several days without spoilage. Natural fermentation processes enhanced preservation while improving digestion and nutrient availability. This wasn't just cooking, it was strategic food design. Fermented oat preparations supported gut health, extended shelf life, and reduced waste. Every part of the grain was utilized, including husks, which were processed into additional food sources. Nothing was wasted because nothing could be afforded to be wasted. Modern discussions around meal prep, fermentation, and gut health are rediscovering principles that were once essential knowledge for survival. The ultimate test came during prolonged periods of climate instability, particularly in the late 17th century. This era brought severe cooling, crop failures, and widespread famine across parts of Europe. Harvests failed repeatedly. Livestock died. Food scarcity became a constant threat. In these conditions, dependence on fragile crops became a liability. Wheat yields dropped sharply, with even minor temperature changes. Entire harvests could be lost due to a single poor season. Communities that relied heavily on such crops faced devastating consequences. Oats, however, continued to produce. They tolerated frost. They survived excess moisture. They delivered consistent yields when other crops collapsed. Historical records suggest that without oats, mortality rates during these periods would have been significantly higher. Entire populations depended on their reliability. This wasn't about preference anymore. It was about survival at scale. The same grain that fueled bodies also supported mental resilience. By the 19th century, oats had taken on another role, one that extended beyond physical survival. Medical practitioners began using oat-based preparations to treat fatigue, stress, and nervous system exhaustion. These were prescribed to individuals dealing with the pressures of industrial life. Long before modern discussions of burnout existed, oats were recognized as stabilizing, restorative, and supportive of long-term endurance, not just physically, but mentally. This connection is not surprising. Sustained energy, stable blood sugar, and proper nutrition directly influence cognitive function and emotional resilience. The same properties that made oats effective in harsh climates made them valuable in high-stress environments. Once again, what was considered simple proved to be deeply effective. The real lesson is not about oats. It's about how you think about survival. This entire history points to a pattern that goes far beyond a single crop. Humans consistently overvalue what appears refined, powerful, or prestigious, and undervalue what is simple, resilient, and adaptable. When conditions are stable, this doesn't seem like a problem. But when systems are stressed, the gap between perception and reality becomes dangerous. Oats survived because they didn't depend on perfection. They didn't require ideal inputs. They didn't collapse under variability. They simply worked. And that is the core principle of survival: reliability under pressure. Today, global food systems are more complex than ever, but also more fragile. Supply chains depend on stability. Crops are optimized for yield, not resilience. Disruptions, whether from climate, conflict, or logistics, can have widespread consequences. The lesson here is not to abandon modern systems, but to understand their limits. Resilience comes from redundancy, adaptability, and simplicity. The next time you think about preparedness, whether it's food, systems, or strategy, ask yourself a different question. Not what looks best, not what is most popular, but what continues to function when conditions are at their worst. Because history has already answered that question. If you found this breakdown valuable and you want more real, historically grounded survival insights that actually apply to the modern world, make sure you subscribe and share this with someone who takes preparedness seriously. And in the comments, I want to hear your take. If you had to rely on one principle from history to survive a long-term crisis, what would it be? Stay sharp. Stay prepared.